Let's talk about the WCW power plant for a second, because they showed brief footage of that training program, and they talked about the fact that Goldberg was taken to the power plant, given the basic bit of training, and then put on the fast track and put on TV because they needed something and they saw they had something. Where do we start? The whole power plant thing. And I think that's the point of this program, is you got a little bit more sympathy for the position that Goldberg was put in. It's not like that anybody who knew the wrestling business didn't know the position he was being put in, but a lot of the fans may have gotten a little more sympathy because the power plant was a shitty training program that produced nobody of any fucking quality whatsoever because they didn't teach them professional wrestling. It was that weird boot camp Marine drill instructor. We're going to run all of you off, even though you're already there. I can understand running people off, not smarting them up before they get in the business or before they get in a fucking training program or see if they've got what it takes the first couple of weeks, right?
Didn't they run off Batista?
Yeah. They ran off a lot of people because it was stupid, because it was like going to school to be a doctor and you spend all your time washing dishes. And it was because Jody Hamilton, I know he's passed on. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. He was a nice person to me. I never had any problems with him. He was a great talent. The Assassins were a legendary tag team. Jody was a great promo. But the reason why Jody was chosen to head the training program was because of just his contacts with all the local wrestlers in Georgia. He had, in the mid-'80s, he had started Deep South Wrestling when all the territories went under. And it ran a year or two, and it didn't really work. And this was not, I mean, it's not alone that independent wrestling promotions were going out of business at that time period, but Deep South was not a good one, nor was it ever successful, nor did they ever get any buzz for anything. It was just a local independent that he got barely TV, and it ran for a while. And then...
Wait, when did he show up in WCW again? Because he was in the booking committee meetings with you.
That's right. Then by 89, Turner Broadcasting buys WCW, and Jody comes in because, again, they're doing research on who is in Atlanta, who's involved in wrestling. Jody was very articulate and was able to sell himself. I have all this experience, and I've run my own promotion. They put him on the booking committee, the larger booking committee. When I was involved, and that's my firsthand testimony, Ric Flair was the booker. He used Kevin as his assistant. He put me on, basically do the paperwork and come up with some ideas every once in a while. The entire booking committee, because of Jim Herd, also included himself, because Herd had to be in those meetings where we didn't get anything done. Jim Barnett, because Barnett was the guy that Herd had hired to tell him everything he was doing was right. Jody Hamilton, because Jody was in the office, he was in charge of getting the rings to the buildings and booking job guys for TV and working with the ring crew and miscellaneous stuff like that. And also, did I mention Jim Ross was there because he was being forced to work in the office at that point. That was the enlarged booking committee, but none of those people were ever actually booked anything because Flair and Kevin and I did it in the car or in the locker room or in the hotel when we were away from Jim Herd. And actually, Jody, by that point, had sleep apnea. And he used to have a corner office in CNN Center in the WCW offices. But he kept falling asleep with the door open, and everybody could hear him snoring all through the office area. So they moved him out to a cubicle with no walls in the middle where they thought he wouldn't go to sleep. And so then later on, they moved Jody out of the office entirely and put him in charge of the power plant. And again, guy's a great veteran, but now it's 1989 and his wrestling career, except for when he worked for himself, had ended 10 years previously. and he's nearing 60. And so he finds Dwayne Bruce because he already knew Dwayne Bruce from doing jobs on TV. And I'm not knocking Dwayne Bruce either.
Now, a lot of fans don't know who Dwayne Bruce or Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker is or was.
Well, Dwayne Bruce was Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, who became the head trainer at the power plant. You see him in this Goldberg documentary. He's the guy screaming at people while they're doing squats and they got the puke bucket out and everything. The reason why they called him Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker was because he and Dale Veazey, another local guy from Georgia, had started a tag team called the State Patrol, and they dressed up as Georgia State Patrol guys, right? And I don't remember what Dale's rank was, but Dwayne Bruce became Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. So then Jody gives him the spot as head trainer at the power plant. Again, I'm not insulting Dwayne Bruce, but he was a job guy for WCW. Whenever he worked for WCW, he made appearances on local independent Georgia shows, and he was worked on top or whatever, but he had never, ever been in a position in any wrestling territory or company of any size or extent to where he was used in any way. But he browbeats and yells at and makes the trainees to power plant do millions of calisthenics. And the point is, the power plant was famous at that time inside the industry. And now that 20-something years has passed and everybody's seen who didn't come from there and who got run off from there, and that Goldberg was the only success story, and now they found out why. It was a joke. It was a joke training program. And every once in a while, if somebody like Terry Taylor got heat with the office, they'd send him over there because the power plant was in a different location than CNN Center downtown. And he'd try to kibitz with the guys, but it was not a coherent training program for wrestling. They taught guys like trained chimpanzees how to do moves and how to stay in condition. There was no mental teaching. There was no, this is the psychology of wrestling. This is the history of wrestling. This is the purpose of wrestling. This is everything we taught at OVW, anything that you learn in any quality training program, they didn't do there. That's why Mark Marrow, Johnny B. Bad, learned how to be Johnny B. Bad and be Johnny B. Bad in a match for 9 minutes. That's what they learned. And Bill DeMott carried that method of training that Jody liked when they started Deep South Wrestling again as a WWE developmental program in 2002-ish, 3-ish or whatever. And that thing burst into flames and fucking blew up on them. Because it was to the point where the WWE had to go down and get all of their equipment from the facility. They sent a truck overnight and were there first thing in the morning under cover of darkness to get the shit and pull out. And told Jody when they were grabbing the shit that they were closing the deal up. That's how bad they wanted to get away from that thing, because it was a fiasco. And there were stories that were not reported publicly that could have left them liable for other shit.
Dale Veazey was Lieutenant James Earl Wright.
That's right. Almost James Earl Ray. James Earl Wright. And that was, by the way, that was on Georgia TV in 1989. That showed you where some people's heads were at that point. But anyway, back to Goldberg on the biography. So that's why he didn't know what the fuck. He knew how to do power moves and growl and scream. That was his natural talent. They did nothing to bring anything else out. So, and when he had his base areas, first match on TV against Bill DeMott, it was all slams and spears and stuff like that. And then they put him on the road and gave him an undefeated streak.